All right, hi everyone. In this video, we are going to continue working with the SF package in R. What I want to talk about now is continue to think about how we can wrangle an SF object in R. And so SF objects, these are data frames, so we can essentially use all of the same techniques that we used with wrangling data frames to wrangling SF objects. They just have this additional special geometry column that data frames don't necessarily have. So at this point, just want to make sure you've been running the other videos and you have loaded up the shape file for the US into R so that you have a SF object called US underscore SF. And that is the shape file that we imported that has the boundaries for all of the US states and a couple of other attributes like their US Postal Service abbreviation, land area, water area, things like that. So let's say I've got another data frame that has additional attributes like COVID, maybe how many cases there were for COVID, and other variables. And I want to merge that data into the SF object that we have with the US states. So let's say I've got a data frame where I've got each observation is a state, and then I've got some attributes for each of those states, and I want to merge them in with my SF object. So there is a data set which is called COVID 2021 0307, which has COVID data up to March 7th of 2021. And so this data sits inside. So this is a data frame that is inside of an R package, which is called Bayes utils. And this is not something which is available through like the typical R distribution, but this is a package that Joshua French set up in his GitHub. So if you want to load this up, you need to install the Bayes utils package. If you're working in the Posit cloud, you don't need to do anything. I've already loaded that package, so you can ignore this. This is just for people that are running R on RStudio locally on your computer. You may not have the Bayes utilities package installed. Probably you don't. You can look at your package list and see whether or not it's there. I do have it loaded over here, or I don't have it loaded. I have Bayes utils installed. And if you're working in Posit Cloud, you should see that listed there. You don't need to do anything. If you are working on your own computer, then you do need to install this. And the way that you should do it is take that install packages remotes command, put that down here in the console. You would run this command. I'll run it. I've already installed this. I don't want to restart R. So that has loaded the package again. And then you would want to install so that installed the remotes package. And then if you want to install the Bayes utils package from GitHub, you would run this command from the console. So this is using the : notation for using the install GitHub. So install GitHub is a function in the remotes package. So we needed that function. So that's why we first installed remotes. I'm not going to load the remotes package. I'm just going to call in install underscore GitHub so that we can install the Bayes utils package. And then I won't need the remotes package to do anything else. So that's why I didn't load remotes. I just used the : method for calling in one function from remotes. And we're not going to need to use anything from remotes after that. So once you've run the install packages remotes command in the console, once you've run the install GitHub command from the console, you're now ready to go. Again, if you're working on Posit Cloud, then you don't need to do either of those things. I've already installed Bayes utils in our project. So now if I have Bayes utils package, I can now access the data frame COVID underscore 2021 0307. And if we want to see what is in that, we can take a look. So if you look at the structure of this data frame, we can see we've got 50 observations, 9 variables, and this is not an SF object. There is no geometry column in this data frame, but this has state names, state abbreviations. They're called something different than they were in the US underscore SF column. And then we have some additional variables, some additional attributes that we want to add to the others. So we've got number of COVID deaths, reported deaths, number of reported cases, the population, the median income, the high school graduation rate, and the college graduation rates, and some information about the vote differential in the 2020 election between Democrat and Republican. So this has some additional attributes that we're going to merge with the US underscore SF object. So one way that I can do this is just use the merge function from Bayes R. So how that works is I enter one data frame, which is US underscore SF. I enter a second data frame, which is the COVID data. And then I indicate how am I going to merge these two together? How am I going to match up rows? I'm going to merge the rows together if they have the same state abbreviation. But these columns have different names in each of these two data frames. So in the USSF object, that column was called STUSPS for Postal Service Abbreviation. In the COVID data, that column is called state underscore abbreviation ABB. So I want to merge them by state abbreviations, and I just need to indicate that they have different column names in those two data frames. So this is going to merge those two together, and it's going to create a new data frame, which is going to be an SF object itself called COVID underscore US. And then we can run a head command to take a look at the first couple of rows or the first 6 rows of that SF object. So first of all, when I merged an SF object and a data frame, the result is a simple feature object. So what it did is it merged together the state based on the abbreviation. One of them included Puerto Rico and DC. The other one did not. So it removed Puerto Rico and DC since the COVID data didn't have those two states or those territories in its data. So I've got all of these states. I have the original variables, the original attributes from US underscore SF. And now over here, I've got some additional attributes that we pulled in from the COVID data. And then it keeps the geometry list column at the end. And I have some duplicate here. I have one column that is named name, and I have another column that is named state name. And we could do some additional cleaning up with this. We could do like a select minus state name, and that would remove state name column from this. But now this merged together those two data frames nicely. So now I've got some additional attributes for each state. Since this is a data frame and it's tidy, we could use the dplyr package and the join functions in the dplyr package to merge these. So basically full join works the same way as merge. I enter the first data frame US underscore SF. I enter the name of the data frame where the additional COVID and other variables are being stored. And this works a little different than the merge, which used by.x and by.y to specify how we're merging the data frames with the full join. If my columns have different names, then the way I enter that is inside of a vector. So I have an argument that's just named by instead of two separate ones for by x and by y. And then inside of a vector, I create a vector where I define how we're merging things up. So here there's just one condition. If they have the same, if the abbreviation in both of these data frames are the same, then we're going to merge them together. So I'm going to call this a different data frame, COVID underscore US2, and we can compare it to the first one that we created, and we get exactly the same. We have 50 observations, and we have 17 fields recorded for each of them. And yeah, so here we're looking at just the first 6 rows that are printed to the screen. We have the original variables, and now we have all of these additional variables that we just added on. So this does exactly the same thing. I do want to just point out, like, if we had something in one of these, so if I had something in the COVID data frame, a row that didn't match up with US underscore SF, then what it's going to do, it's going to keep that observation. It's just going to fill in missing values in the row that is created. And what happens if we have a missing geometry in the geometry column? It's going to use an empty geometry object for that row. So that is kind of a nice thing in that as we're creating plots, any of these missing values are not going to cause trouble. The geometry is going to have an empty geometry object, so it just won't be plotted when we try to plot it. But it's not going to cause any bugs or errors in the rest of our code, so it will kind of merge them, even if we're missing the geometry, in a nice way that won't cause any problems for us when we're trying to use other plotting functions. And that's what we'll talk about in the next video.